Well, you talk about the Beach Boys. First of all, the Beach Boys, okay, they're giant. All
Yeah.
right. You've got Brian, Brian was a freaking genius on so many levels. He was a songwriter on the level of McCartney and Lennon. He was the producer on the level of George Martin. He had access to the Wrecking Crew, to play the perfect instrument for the perfect song. He had access to Phil Spector, getting tips and everything. He was learning. He was in the hottest recording place on planet Earth at that time with the best equipment. But here's the deal about the Beatles and why I would choose the Beatles over the Beach Boys. With all of that Brian had at his access, and it does not take away one iota of his genius when I say this, these four young lads over in England were playing their own damn instruments and sounding just as good as any freaking Beach Boy song. And they didn't have to go get Hal Blaine to play the drums for them, or Glenn Campbell to come in and play and by the way, Glenn Campbell is a fabulous guitar player.
Oh, he really is. Yeah.
And he was in the Beach Boys for a short period of time, and he was part of the Wrecking Crew. For those of you who do not know who the Wrecking Crew is, the Wrecking Crew was a group of probably 12 to 25-ish musicians that are on every freaking hit you've ever heard, and you didn't know they were there.
Yes,
and they were all out of Carol Kay, bassist, who did that fabulous bass line for the Beach Boys psychedelic hit, Good Vibrations, one of the best bassists on the planet, and a female working in a man's world. If you ever get a chance to see the documentary on the Wrecking Crew, check that out. But despite that armament, despite all that Brian had there, that's what he had, and he did the very best he had with it. Right. The Beatles would pick up their usually Epiphones. They weren't even into Gibsons for the most part. They're Epiphones. Or, everybody talks about the Hofner bass, and I wish McCartney would throw that freaking thing away.
I know.
His best bass was the Rickenbacker. All right? That thing sang. I'm a bass player. That's the bass that he should be playing. And but everybody wants to see the violin. It was a cheap bass, and it barely stayed in tune. Yeah, later when the Beatles got big, he had people work on it. Now it plays like a charm, but I'm wondering what's left of the original rig. That's what I'm saying. You've got the Beach Boys, and then you've got the Beatles over here, and of course, they would have orchestras. George Martin would bring in orchestras. But even at that point, and it was usually, everybody goes, well, John Lennon was the anti-orchestra guy. Not really. It was Paul who was always chomping at George's bit there, always saying, well, no, I don't want it to sound like Madhavani or whatever, person. I don't want a bunch of tremolo on those strings. He was the one that was kind of, well, we'll do orchestra, but we got to be real careful. A lot of people said that Paul was he was being hypocritical when he was caught stating in the Get Back movie that's on Disney Plus that he was actually contemplating strings for the long winding road. And so therefore when he was jamming on Phil Spector, he should have shut his mouth because we caught you were contemplating strings. Paul was always contemplating strings. So shut the fuck up. You don't know what excuse my language. You don't know what you're talking about. I mean, the man is an amazing bass player, a great guitarist, fantastic drummer, and gosh, I can't even begin to do on keyboards. I studied music theory on keyboards. I play like a 5-year-old. I know how to make chords, and then I can mess up, and when I'm writing stuff, I can get things going. All right, but I understand music theory through keyboard study. My high school music teacher hammered it into me. That's how I learned, right? So I'm not a keyboardist at all, but when I watch Paul McCartney, I mean, he's right up there with Elton John.
Yeah.
right? He's right up there with Billy Joel, and Billy Joel is supposed to be a pretty damn good keyboard player. I'm
Oh,
not
yeah.
an expert in that. My area is guitar, bass, things like that. But
Right.
damn, the man, and he could write rock and roll, he could write ballads, he could write like 42 different types of ballads. What do you
Right.
want? What do you want? When he dies, Royce, when he passes away, you talk about a morning and you watch his entire life history will be reassessed because he has still been battling the black eye of John Lennon passing first and the fact that they were separate and they never got back together officially. And
Right.
so, when John died, we got all kinds of nonsense. Well, John was really the Beatles. John was the guy that did this. John did that. John and Paul evenly. When the Beatles were together,
Yeah.
they were each other's co-equal. There was no better. And the only reason Paul slightly is in my favor is because we got more time with the guy. That's all.
Yeah.
That's it.
right. Yeah. More time.
They were talking about in one of the streams here in the last couple of days, who would be your favorite solo artist? And people choose Elvis or they choose so and so. And I would, if I was going to choose just a solo artist, I would probably pick David Bowie as being my favorite solo artist. Doing as a solo artist what he did and the territory he covered is wonderful. But if you're allowed to pick somebody who was in a band before they became a solo artist, McCartney is the guy, and he barely beats out John. And I've made this clear many times. The only reason he beats out John Lennon is because some asshole came around and took John Lennon away from us far too soon. So we don't know what John would have done, but we do know what McCartney did, and he's a genius. I don't care what anybody says, he's a genius.